Tonight on Nation to Nation, only in Ontario, you say. It's the first province to hire an advisor on murdered and missing women.
I'm building trust relationship with families, so it's really difficult for families to come in not knowing who they're dealing with, not having that point of contact.
It's 420 today, and with legalization on the horizon, one Indigenous group is getting ready.
They have not consulted nor accommodated the First Nations in regard to the cannabis issue and the cannabis industry as a whole.
Welcome to Nation. Hello, I'm Todd Lamoran. The National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls is off to a rocky start. With word that 2 advisory meetings were cancelled this week, some families are calling for a boycott. A little known part of the inquiry process is that the Department of Justice has provided $16.7 million in funding so that each province can establish family liaison offices that would help navigate the justice system or even find a traditional healer. So far, the province of Ontario is the only one to establish a liaison office. Offices have been opened in Thunder Bay, Sudbury, and Sioux Lookout. Ontario has also hired a special advisor. Her name is Maggie Cywink, and she joins us now via Skype. Welcome to Nation.
It's an honor. Thank you very much.
As a special advisor, what exactly do you do for the families?
Well, my responsibility with the families is to ensure that they have a voice, that their concerns are heard by the Ministry of the Attorney General, that our liaison offices are aware of the families and as well as the women who have suffered violence that are either in rural or First Nations and in the cities throughout Ontario.
Now, what do these offices do? I suppose what can a person who maybe lives in those areas that I mentioned do if they contact one of these offices?
Well, first of all, they do not have to be registered with the inquiry to receive services at the FILUs, which are the Family Information Liaison Units. They can be a family member who has suffered a loss of an individual, of a family, or the missing individual, as well as families that are looking for help in terms of referrals for mental health. They can also contact the FILUs for information about the particular cases. They can as well find out about coroner's reports that have been issued on their families.
Without naming any names, can you give me a concrete example of where a family has been helped and some closure provided?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I guess I could take myself for example. Some months ago, my brother and I had requested a meeting with the OPP and the coroner's office because we had some very direct questions about my sister's case, questions we had not been able to have answered. Because my sister's case was still an open case, the police, the OPP were there, and the coroner and a lawyer from the Indigenous Justice Division. And we felt as though all of our questions that we had, with the exception of information that they could not share with us, was given to us and fully understood.
I guess what could be the biggest misconception families might have of what your role is and what these offices do?
Well, my position really is to help families connect to the Family Information Liaison Units, as well as help families to, I'm building trust relationships with families. So it's really difficult for families to come in not knowing who they're dealing with, not having that point of contact, talking to an individual at an office that they don't know very well. So my responsibility is to bridge that relationship, to help the families understand what kind of services we offer, as well as meet with the families on a one-on-one basis to answer any questions or concerns they may have as well.
For a case that remains unsolved, how did that event change your life?
I think it made me very much aware of the ongoing trauma that happens with myself and my family, as well as families throughout the province of Ontario. It has brought myself a huge awareness in terms of how many families are being affected in the province of Ontario. For instance, my parents had 13 children, and there are 10 of us living. So you multiply the amount of how that's affected 10 family members times the number of children that we have. So I think it really has given me this broader picture in terms of how losing a family member affects not just the individual, but an entire family and an entire community.
And as a family member yourself, what do you think about how the inquiry itself has gotten off the ground?
I think I was very hopeful. Right now, I'm cautiously optimistic. I do hope that they find a deeper connection with the families and put the families first. I'm hoping that they take all of the pre-inquiry reports and they actually start implementing what families have already told them they want during this inquiry. I'm worried about the inquiry, actually.
Why do you say?
I'm sorry, and what it's really doing to families.
What's the biggest worry you have of the inquiry?
I guess the miscommunication. Families don't really know what their responsibility is in the inquiry. The lack of direct communication with the families. I think that's really one of the biggest concerns.
Were expectations of the inquiry maybe just too sky high?
For families or for
families?
Canada's? I don't think families really have a huge expectation of what the inquiry is going to be doing, because they weren't involved in developing the terms of reference or the mandates. Some of the things that are in those kinds of paper, I guess, in some of those requirements, families don't always really understand that kind of language. We're simple people.
What should it do to regain the confidence of some of its critics? I'm talking about the inquiry itself.
That's a very big question. I think it's a broad question simply because Canada is it's a huge country, and there are many different levels, and there's so many dynamics going on within the families themselves. In terms of, you have, for instance, the missing, you have the unresolved, you have the murdered that are solved, and you have the unsolved murders. So it's such a dynamic of what they're trying to do. I would say it's really very, very complicated, and I don't think they really understand how complicated it is for families as well.
Of course, some are calling for a reset or a pause in the inquiry. Do you think that is necessary to maybe iron out some of these difficulties?
I think they were smart to get that, to have the pause. I think they need to listen to the families carefully at this point. I think they need to tread carefully, because families, I have heard that families want to boycott this. Families want to stop this inquiry because it's really going down the wrong tracks.
Well, let's hope something can happen here. Ms. Cywink, I want to thank you for taking some time to talk to me.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm honored.
Another break, but when we come back, we can't ignore the fact it's 420. We'll have two guests in studio who are promoting an Indigenous perspective on marijuana.
So we have taken it upon ourselves as our duty and rights and responsibilities to then organize these organizations in order to put together a plan of action that we may then develop our own Indigenous cannabis industry, separate from Canada's, but in the same thing. As the two-row wampum is, they stay in their ship, we stay in our canoe.
Welcome back. It's 420 today, so it's appropriate that we turn our attention to marijuana. The Liberal government has promised to legalize it by sometime in 2018. However, police continue to raid medical marijuana dispensaries. On Tuesday, Six Nations police raided one on reserve there and arrested 5 people. But Indigenous people are still looking to get into the business. Former National Chief Phil Fontaine recently announced a joint venture called Indigenous Roots. He sees it as a way to create jobs and dispense safe medical marijuana on reserves. Just a few weeks ago, APTN National News featured a company on the Tyendinaga Mohawk Nation called Legacy 420. In studio is Brian Marquis, President of the Ontario Indigenous Medical Cannabis Association, and Rob Stevenson, Vice President of the same organization. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having us.
Now, the Liberal government has finally tabled legislation to finally decriminalize pot. It's supposed to happen maybe in 2018. How does this affect your plans for the marijuana business?
As far as I can tell, it really doesn't affect our plans as such. We are a sovereign nation. We are rising up to assert ourselves as Indigenous people. So, I mean, it will have an effect. We really don't know how that will affect us, but we are going to do what we're going to do and help our people rise up out of poverty and establish ourselves.
Of course, right now it's all medical. It's called medical
Yes.
marijuana dispensary, but I'm assuming that could change after, and we could be talking about larger amounts being sold, I'd imagine.
Certainly, one of the problems that they haven't done is they have not consulted nor accommodated the First Nations in regard to the cannabis issue and the cannabis industry as a whole. So we have taken it upon ourselves as our duty and rights and responsibilities to then organize these organizations in order to put together a plan of action that we may then develop our own Indigenous cannabis industry separate from Canada's, but in the same thing. As the two-row wampum is, they stay in their ship, we stay in our canoe, and we're always willing to work with anyone, providing that they treat us as that equal partner. But the fact that they haven't consulted nor accommodated us in any meaningful way whatsoever has now forced us now to develop this organization in order to regulate things like safety, security, our own industry, where it grows, how it develops. So this is what we're trying to do with that, and frankly, we've been very successful so far up to this date.
Now, of course, this means decriminalizing and taking out of the criminal code, but there will obviously be other regulations put in. You talk about sovereignty. Would you be following other regulations, whether they come from the federal government or maybe even the province?
Well, as a matter of fact, I have written to David Zimmer, who is the provincial representative for Indigenous relations. So I have written him and requested a meeting with him. We'll see what he does. If he grants us that meeting, I'd like to have that meeting so that we can put forth our position on our own industry in regards to the cannabis, medical and otherwise, and including hemp. You know, we do have a plan to develop this industry within the First Nations, and nobody knows about it because they have never consulted nor accommodated us on that. But we'd be happy to meet. We would be happy to meet with any federal level of people in regards to this, as well as provincial. As long as they understand that we have our traditional ways according to that two-row wampum, where we steer our canoe and they steer their ship, and hopefully together those things can happen so that we can benefit not just Canada, but in First Nations Indigenous territories with that socio-economic betterment.
And what people need to realize is the regulations that we're setting within our organization are stricter than Health Canada's regulations that they currently have. All the product that would be going through our association would be tested. We are not allowing any pesticides. Currently, Health Canada allows for 7 pesticides. Ours is going to be organic, all natural, and healthy.
Now, of course, it seems other Indigenous people have noticed this, and this might be a good business. Phil Fontaine recently came out and said that there could be, as you mentioned earlier, a potential economic benefit for First Nations. What do you think of him getting into this business?
Well, that's kind of a personal question, because personally I don't really know Phil very well. But it doesn't surprise me to find out that people are looking into this industry, and they're looking to see how First Nations people can become involved and benefit both socially and economically from it. And not only that, see, we view this as a medicine, whether it's used socially or whether it's used medically. It is a medicine that we have had for thousands of years. As a matter of fact, we are looking at ceremonies that were done in regards to this medicine and songs that have been sung for thousands of years over this medicine. It is part of First Nations culture, certainly in the Haudenosaunee Nation through the Seneca. And so we're looking at doing that in regards to implementing our duties and responsibilities to the medicine societies in order to use a medicine to help one another and to help our people and to help people in general.
Do you see it as something, I know you guys are just based here in Ontario, but nationally, is this something that First Nations really can look at as being something that'd be a good development, good economic development for them?
Absolutely. Now, even though I'm the president of the Ontario chapter, I also sit on the national board as Ontario's representative. Now, we have representatives from the Yukon, all the way from coast to coast to coast, and we have received extremely positive attitudes and reviews around it. We have numerous First Nations ready to get on board, and as soon as we are able to start developing our membership drive, I think then people are going to see just how many members we are going to end up having. We'll put together growers, dispensary owners, we'll put together all of those people that are involved, bakers, candy makers, workers, patients, elders, men's circles, women's circles, youth circles. We do want to include everybody in this, and this is why we have such an eclectic and a varied group of people within this organization, from young to old. And I think that by doing that, we'll get a better sense of what each community needs and each community wants, and we will try our best to make sure that those regulations and those safety standards and those security standards and those quality standards are put into place.
Now, of course, there's been criticism of the Justice Minister, of Jody Wilson-Raybould, still allowing pot to be people being charged, possession, and trafficking, even though we know this is coming down the pike. 2 days ago, there was a raid in Six Nations by Six Nations tribal police on a medical marijuana dispensary. Why is this still happening, do you think?
I mean, it's a lack of education is all I can say. I mean, if I can convince my grandma about all the benefits and the advantages people can have with this miracle plant, I think we can teach anybody. It's just that learning experience and that you know, learning about this whole industry, but it's got a stigma attached to it that's been around for hundreds of years that we need to hurdle. We need to get over that and get past that so we can see the true benefits of this. All you really need to do is go online, look at articles online, you know, studies done by Harvard, Oxford, big names like that. They're all proving all the potential for this plant and how safe it actually is compared to a lot of other products out there.
In regards to the Six Nations police shutting down a dispensary in Oswego, Oswegan, I believe it was. Personally, I can't really speak to about that other than I'm disappointed. But again, I don't have the details or anything like that in regards to that particular dispensary and how they do things. But I do know with the dispensary that I've been to in Tyendinaga, especially the new dispensary that'll be opening up on Canada Day, it is a state-of-the-art, high security, extremely well thought out building, and our codes of conducts and standards, as my friend Rob has mentioned, are much higher than Canada's standards. One of the things that's been disappointing to me, I took a tour of one of the main facilities just last week, and when I asked the gentleman, how many pesticides do you put on your plants? He said, now quote, "Oh, very few." Now that concerns me. I've been involved with cannabis now for 42 years. I have never used pesticides or herbicides on any of my plants, and I've treated thousands and thousands of people with different maladies of every kind you could think of, including epilepsy and cancer. And so when I think about this as a medicine, which we do, It concerns me that, the government on May the 12th, 2015 gave licensed producers permission to put up to 7 pesticides and herbicides in these plants. What is to stop them from later on deciding that, you know what, we need more chemicals on there, we need this on there, we need that on there, and what is to stop them from doing that? They did it with tobacco. And I think that if it's somehow they can see that as a profit margin, who knows? I'm not saying they are, but I'm saying the possibility is that what if they put nicotine on it and then addict people to it? I mean, that is a possibility. I mean, it's a concern. That's what I'm saying. I'm concerned because their motivation is profit. Our motivation is cultural.
Okay, so we're almost out of time, but I want to ask one last question before we run out of time. You are here, of course, because it's the big 420 smoke in Parliament Hill. This legislation comes in. Will this be a thing of the past? Will we still have these smoke-ins, do you think, every year at 420?
Absolutely. I think this is it's going to be almost a tradition, a festival that will definitely happen every year. It's world-renowned, 420. So I definitely don't see that stopping anytime soon.
It will grow and receive more and more funding as time goes on. And in a way, it's like making history while you know you're making it. We didn't start this, but we're adding our contribution in our lifetime so that hopefully, not just our nation, but the Canadian nation learns the benefits. Did you know that cannabis was the most widely prescribed drug for asthma before it was made illegal? I've seen documentations of 15-year double-blind studies out of Harvard that show that cannabis has an astounding success rate for treating COPD.
Well, on that note, we're all out of time. I want to thank you, gentlemen, for coming in on this day to talk about this. Thank you.
Thank you for having us. It's been wonderful. Thank you.
We'll be back after a short break. That's all the time we have. I'll be back next week to bring you an interview with Justice Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould. Before we go, we'll leave you with the sights and sounds, but not smells, of the 420 gathering on Parliament Hill. I'm Todd Lamarand. Have a great evening.
I believe in the end of prohibition.
With this new legislation that we have now, it's going to criminalize Indigenous communities once again. Once again, we're going to be labeled as a criminal element. Once again, we're going to be left out. We're saying no. We're saying no. We're putting our feet down as Indigenous people to help share our medicine with you. And help
420 2017, in between a giant donut and a giant rabbit.
As a separate and sovereign nation recognized as such on an international basis, the Haudenosaunee Nation will assert their sovereignty in regards to the cannabis industry, as well as we will trade among all Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island in that regard. That is our inherent right.
Last year, I think one of you guys interviewed me. I didn't get on.
What does that mean from 18 months from now? Again, it's another loophole. It's another gap where, according to